Thanks so much, Madam. What a wonderful gathering we have of everyone here today. To introduce myself, I'm Briony Rogers. I'm based at Monash Sustainable Development Institute, which sits outside the faculty structure of Monash. The Sustainable Development Goals are one of its key frameworks, and it's very impact-focused and partnership-focused and has a role in helping convene and bring together the expertise that sits within faculties around sustainable development objectives and really help with that research translation and a home base for a lot of the university's transdisciplinary research as well. I myself fit that transdisciplinary mould. I started out as a civil engineer working in the water sector, and then became very fascinated by the social and governance and policy questions around infrastructure. So I did my PhD in that at Monash, looking at processes of change. Basically, if we know that the ways we're planning and designing and managing our infrastructure systems aren't adequate for our sustainability and resilience objectives, how do we get a group of stakeholders and actors and whatever role the different people and organisations have aligned around a shared vision of where we need to head, and how do we be really strategic and tactical in driving that change rapidly? And that's really, I guess, that lens has influenced the range of research that I do. A lot of that was with the CRC for water sensitive cities. So this was a 9-year program with nature-based solutions at the heart of it. And at the time, disaster wasn't a key framing, although the Millennium Drought and then flood following straight after was very much a context for that research. And what I really observed in that experience, and starting out as a postdoc at the early days and ending up as the Chief Research Officer of the CRC, was that the power of having a whole industry and a university collective aligned around a question of change. And I think there's a real opportunity for us in this disaster sector to bring some of that explicit framing. I think a lot of the research questions that we're each exploring actually around recognising that the way we're doing things now aren't going to cut it anymore. It's not business as usual when it comes to climate change impacts. And so whatever our disciplinary lens or our methodological lens, there's, I think, an implicit change agenda. And I think that would be very powerful for us to be able to have a more deep dialogue around, well, what is that change agenda for each of our different entry points, and how do we start being really strategic about scoping and designing our research to help that change agenda move forward. But back to Monash. Impact 2030 is our broad strategic plan, and one of the quite, I think, remarkable things about Impact 2030 is that it says that the impact Monash will have on its communities, on communities, is going to be the marker of its success in 2030. So it really brings impact to the fore, and it's structured around three global challenges of climate change, geopolitical security, and thriving communities. Clearly, disasters is very much central, certainly to climate change and thriving communities, but I think increasingly geopolitical security as well. So this is one of our key organising frameworks, although I think it's fair to say as a university we're still figuring out how do these global challenges at a university level then filter down into meaningful platforms for bringing people together to collaborate. The way that I've structured this is, I guess, broad themes, because I think increasingly, disaster has so many different entry points and angles that need to be explored. And so a bit of a cook's tour, I guess, of some of the areas of research that sits across Monash. Climate change and weather itself. Trent, thanks, you've already mentioned the ARC Centre for Excellence. The weather of the 21st century. While we know there's broad trends of how the climate is changing and what that means for weather, there's very little evidence of how that downscales into specific weather events and impacts for particular places. And so there's a whole body of research that's needed to get that sort of evidence to then inform decision making and investment choices. So weather system dynamics, modelling, etc. are a key part of that. We've also got a climate change communications hub, which very much looks at how do we help to influence the broader narrative in society around climate change and move beyond is climate change real, but actually what are we going to do about it and how do we drive that action? Oops. I should say thank you to colleagues who have sent through slides, and particularly thank you to Jonathan Abrahams from UARC for helping do a lot of the groundwork and bringing these capabilities together. And I apologise, not everyone's full detail can make it onto here, but our Faculty of Medicine and Health and Nursing Sciences is very strong in climate change and planetary health. A whole range of different studies, for example, the Hazelwood Health Study looking at longitudinal impacts of the Hazelwood mine fire. We've got a team that's particularly looking at women's health in a global context and risk and protective factors around disaster. Quite a lot of research around planetary health and infectious diseases. We've got a large program called RISE, Revitalising Informal Settlements and Their Environments, that looks at the interface between the quality of urban environments, particularly in informal settlements, and what that means for human health. Intuitively, of course, they're related, but actually there's very little evidence to show that they're related, and particularly then when you bring a climate change lens around it, then there's more complexities there. Psychological sciences, nursing, I won't read it all, you can get a bit of a picture, I guess, from the words on the screen. Our Centre for Health Economics in Business and Economics have a particular focus on disaster as well, looking at the interrelationships between disaster and disadvantage and the health impacts that come from economic impacts with disaster. We have a whole range of people and groups looking at social sciences, looking through a lens of social sciences as well as design. So in our Faculty of Arts, I know a few of you are here, looking at issues of governance and education, risk perception, decision making, adaptation, critical infrastructure, people's lived experiences, just a bit of a snapshot of some of the projects that are underway there. We've got someone looking at property rights and disaster and climate change. MSDI, this is where I'm based. There's a bunch of us looking at particularly bringing out that lens of change, system change and sustainability transitions overlaid with community resilience and governance. So you can see some of the names and the topics there. We've got within MSDI a number of different units that have their own funding partners and their own program of work. So Climate Works is one of our centres that's looking at decarbonisation. Behaviour Works is another centre. We've got someone here, Bernice, that's looking at behaviour change in all sorts of social and environmental settings, including disaster. Fire to Flourish is headquartered at MSDI, although involves collaboration from across the university, and we also have a strong water program in MSDI that picks up all of that water sensitive cities, nature-based solutions research and impact work and brings it into that environment. Design, architecture, processes, placemaking, these are some of the other features. And then for my last couple of minutes, I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about Fire to Flourish. It's one of the platform programs, I guess, that is bringing together capabilities across the university. This is a really unusual program for a university. It's, in fact, mostly an impact program. We're philanthropically funded, and it's our funders are most interested in supporting communities in their recovery from the 2019-2020 fires. So we're working in deep partnership with communities in 4 different LGAs that you can see here in New South Wales and in Victoria, all of them highly affected by the bushfires, all in the lowest deciles of disadvantage in the CEFA index, and all have higher than national average populations of Aboriginal people in their communities. And so really picking up that challenge of communities at the margins are not being well supported by the mainstream system, and there's a lot of disempowering modes of support that are happening. And so with the benefit of philanthropic funding, with a lot of flexibility, we can try things and co-design with community around what does good models of support look like, and through that start to test and demonstrate what is possible. And grant funding is one of the key aspects of that. Experimenting and co-designing with communities around what if community had their own decision-making power around how grant funding was allocated and directed, and how do we build a social capital lens across that participatory work from a community governance perspective, because we know that social capital is one of the key resilience factors when it comes to disaster. So exploring those sorts of things. Only about a quarter of the budget for the whole program is research, but research is understood as an enabler. So we have action researchers working closely in partnership with communities to co-design processes, support the evaluation, provide those real-time feedback loops. We've got evaluation researchers looking a bit more objectively at, well, what's changed for communities as a result of implementing this model and engaging in these processes. And we've got researchers looking more at the system change, governance sorts of questions that emerge from the insights and the patterns that we see across these 4 different communities. So really connecting up those evidence and insights, developing the replicable models, developing the practical guidance, and, you know, I guess really leaning into that network of change makers. We know that if change needs to occur, it's got to be a collective action, and so, you know, how can we catalyse some of that connecting of people? More specifically about the research program, it's been very much designed around a transition agenda. I said at the start that's been key in my framing for my own personal research and the teams that we work with at MSDI, and it's been quite powerful as a way for individual researchers to connect with an architecture that shows how their insights and their contributions actually fit into a broader narrative. And so for us, our architecture is really recognising that at the moment communities experience a command and control model of support when it comes to disaster. It's disempowering, leading to poor outcomes, and actually missing the opportunity to unlock all of that community capacity as a real asset and genuine contribution in the disaster resilience ecosystem. And so thinking about what does it look like and mean to transition to a new model of support that is based on self-determination. So we've got some researchers looking at more diagnostic type of work around what's currently going on, whether it's health, wellbeing, economics, lived experiences, the action research around actually co-designing and experimenting with communities around different sorts of processes. What are we learning through all of that in terms of evidence, resilience measurement, and so on, and then taking all of that to think about how do we translate that into really meaningful guidance for change in policy and practice. That's it.
Thank you very much, Briony. So good. Thank you very much. Great programme of work.